Eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.
What's up, everybody? This is George C.O.C. Samuels, and you are tuning in to episode 101 of the It Will Come Show. Can you believe we're in the hundreds already? Today, we're going to be looking at the role of identity in changing community habits. So let's dive straight into it. Okie dokie. So hopefully you enjoy today's episode. It is an expansion of last week's episode, actually. So it's inspired by this book called Atomic Habits. So after I did the episode last week around why you should start with who versus why when you're building out communities, I then was brought, well, my attention was brought to this particular book called Atomic Habits by my good friend AJ. And I will include a link to his profile, his YouTube channel, if you are interested. But essentially what this book talks about is sort of things that you might not have thought about when it comes to shifting habits at an individual level. And then in this episode, I'm going to talk about how that actually relates to shifting habits at a group level, at a community level. So what we're going to be going over today is just reviewing again, starting with who versus why. Who do you want to be? Just looking at that question. Traditional goal setting, the goal setting in terms of atomic habits, and then the habit loop. All right, so why you should start with who, not why, when building communities. So if you didn't get a chance to see this particular episode last week, I do recommend that you check it out because it'll give you a little bit of context for today's episode. But we are going to be expanding on some concepts that we covered there. So this very, very simple question, and I'm just going to make sure that you can see actually. Sorry, give me 1 second, guys. All right. Can you guys now see the question? I hope you can, because I think it was getting cut off a bit. So let me just zoom out a bit there for ya. Let's go into full screen mode, right? Now let's try that again. Great, okay. Who do you want to be? So the reason why I've put Will Smith here is, at an individual level, when I was younger, I actually looked up to Will Smith quite a lot. Loved everything about him, from the Fresh Prince days to Men in Black. We won't talk about Wild Wild West. And then, he grew and evolved and what have you. And so a lot of the things that I did, I tried to emulate him. But if you look at this actually is very interesting from a goal setting perspective, because what you find is that when you look at who you want to become, right, it's an identity, you then find naturally that all the things that you do on a day-to-day basis falls in line with that identity, right? And so if we take a look at sort of traditional goal setting, right, you might see something like this. And you'll start usually at the top with sort of a long-term goal and then work your way backwards from there. Now, this comes from an approach of what, right? So the long-term goal typically is, where you want to get to. And it's a what type question. Nothing wrong with that, but what gets sort of neglected is this identity piece. So in the book Atomic Habits, the way they look at it is less of, the goal setting on the right and more of this on the left. And if you look below, you can see it says here, at the beginning, at the core, the person that you believe that you are is actually what should be the goal. Then comes performance, the actions you take. So that could then be, what we look at here. And then after that, results in your appearance, right? And so that connects in with your identity. And the reason why this is so much more powerful is because when it comes to goal setting, and I've seen this happen a lot even in our own private community called the Pack, where there are some people who start off with a goal, but along the way they fall off track, right? And typically, a coach or somebody will be like, okay, we just need to get you back on track, right? But the problem is actually less to do with the goal that they've set and more to do with their identity. And there's a great example that is given in the book around, they give the example of sort of a smoker situation, right? So two people are handed a pack of cigarettes, and one person says, "No, thank you, I'm trying to quit," right? The next person who's handed a pack of cigarettes, their response is, "No, thank you, I don't smoke." Okay? Now, on the outside, if you're not aware of what the subtle difference is here, you might be like, okay, they're both, rejecting. But the example of the first person who said, "No, thank you, I'm trying to quit," that person is still identifying as a smoker who's trying to quit. Okay? The second person is somebody who identifies as a non-smoker. So the resistance is less. It's far easier, right? Now, you could argue, of course, you don't want to be lying to yourself, right? But it's actually a very important, words can be very powerful. So it's very important how you phrase this, because in the second example, that is an identity to take on as a non-smoker that makes it easier for you to be able to simply resist. And then over time, all the sort of day-to-day things that you do supports the identity, the new identity that you want to create. Okay, so at the core of the way that the Atomic Habits looks at goal setting is that your identity. So take a look at any sort of goals that you have right now, and look at the goals that you struggle with. Then look back, or take a step back once, to see what identity do you still have attached with that goal, right? Because once you shift the identity, the goals actually are much easier to be able to achieve. And now I've used this as an example from the community side. Okay, so from the community side, right, we've been looking at individual habits, but from a community standpoint, when people are supporting certain presidents, right, or candidates, what they're doing more often than not is not supporting their policies or any of those things that should matter when it comes to voting. They are actually looking at an identity that they feel that they can relate to. All right. So it actually doesn't matter what these people are looking to make as goals. It's actually, can the people who are voting for these folks see themselves in them? It's an identity issue more so than what these sort of candidates represent in terms of their political leanings. All right. So these, and I use sort of the political example because these are probably the easiest and biggest examples of community, right? And how people rally behind that. Because people then have a sense of belonging and connection by associating with any of these two political leanings, right? Okay, and so finally we got the habit loop. The habit loop is really to help you understand more about how this connects in with the identity piece, right? And how you can actually go about shifting your identity. And so here, with the habit loop, you've got cues, you got craving, response, reward, and then cue. All right. So actually, probably you should start with cue, craving, response, and reward. But it goes in a loop. And so when you start to shift each of these, you're able to shift the underlying issue, right? So the cue for a habit would be like, all right, say you want to shift away from always checking your phone. The cue is whenever you see somebody else checking their phone, you have this subtle craving to check your phone as well. Then your response is, I pick up my phone and I also look at it. And then there's a reward. The reward being like, okay, I get some sort of dopamine hit and continue on, right? And people who create apps and mobile phones, they know a lot about this, and that's why they build the apps that they do in a certain way so that it's more sticky. So the way for you to shift that and have awareness of how to shift it is to shift up the cue, right? So have a look at, one, the identity. What type of person do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who is at the whims of your device? Or do you want to associate yourself, identity-wise, as somebody who can not be so swayed by these sort of habits, all right? And then start going into each of these components of the loop. In change management, so this has to do, within the workforce, there's a field, a professional field of change managers. And these folks, they call themselves change managers, but really it's very much to do with the same area of habits. And so the process is similar, right, to the habit loop. What you're trying to do en masse with large groups is actually help shift people and their habits. So this can very much be applied to communities as well. Now, some could argue that this is actually quite manipulative, but at the same time, it's if you can be transparent with folks about the intended behavior you're wanting to get, and if people can get on board with the new identity that you're trying to create, it's going to be a win-win for everybody. So, of course, there are some sort of there are ethical things around this about ensuring that you let people or bring people on the journey as you're going through this sort of change process, right? Or changing the habits. But by being aware of it too, you can also defend against, right? So the final question I have for you guys today is, who do you want to become? And then who do you want to become with your community, right? Because you will find yourself gravitating towards communities that generally are in line with the identity that you want to create, right? Whenever you're trying to shift something about yourself, you're going to go towards communities that have that intended behavior. And it's going to be a lot easier for you to shift your behaviors by doing so. All right. And finally, what are your thoughts on today's episode? Would love to hear it. And especially, your answer to this question. Place it in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe. And as always, remember that through patience and persistence, it will come.
The eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.